Our featured BBB Wise Giving Alliance accredited charity seal holders for this episode are Healing Paws for Warriors, Jacinto Convite World Organization, Hager, USA. To find out more about these and other BBB Wise Giving Alliance accredited charity seal holders, go to give.org.
You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by BBBGive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by BBBGive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator, and it's your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor. The BBB Wise Giving Alliance, the organization I have the honor of leading, is primarily focused on helping people make informed giving decisions. And that's really important in a country where we have more than 1.3 million organizations. It's difficult for people to know which organizations they can trust. And so we have this wonderful service that allows people to send in requests for us to look into particular charities. And then we essentially will do an evaluation of them in relation to the standards for charity accountability that we published many years ago. Now, we've decided that because the world is changing, obviously we are all aware of the changes that we're feeling and experiencing in the world, that philanthropy is changing as well. There are new forms of giving. People are looking into different causes that may not have been as prevalent years ago. And charities are even operating in ways that we could never have envisioned 20, 25 years ago. And so to keep pace, we are looking at revising the standards that we use to evaluate charities. And that's a pretty involved process because we want to involve a broad set of stakeholders and institutions to assure that we're coming up with the right things that matter to people when it comes to giving them what they need in order to trust a charity, and also to help charities understand what they need to do in order to demonstrate their trustworthiness. Well, to capture the sentiments of the public, one of the things we decided to do was to use our donor trust report survey, which we do at least once a year. And we're now in the 7th year of this. We've done about 13 of them. But we decided to use this particular donor trust report to explore the particular issues that matter to people, so that when we go about reestablishing a new set of standards or a revised set of standards that we use to evaluate charities, we will be able to capture that sentiment. And so we thought we would give you a sneak preview of some of the findings of that survey to help you appreciate what you and your colleagues and peers and individuals are thinking when it relates to the accountability and trustworthiness of charities. And with me to have this discussion is my colleague, Elvia Castro, who is responsible for producing our donor trust report. More than that, she is also the idea and the brains behind the creation of the report. It was her idea to do this when we started it 7 years ago. And she's been on quite a roll with these surveys, and we're so pleased that she has. So, Elvia, welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast.
Thank you, Art. Always a pleasure to be here.
Elvia, as I mentioned, we've been doing this now for 7 years. So, give us a little bit more about the theme. I talked somewhat about it, but give us a little bit more of the theme of this particular donor trust report.
Sure. So we've been tracking public attitudes when it comes to public trust for charities for 7 years now. Every year we interview or we survey about 2,100 adults in the U.S. and another 1,100 or so in Canada to make sure that the results seem meaningful and compare favorably. This year, we want to get a sense of the public priorities when it comes to charity accountability. Like you mentioned, public mindsets change over time. So as we go into our standard revision, we want to make sure that we know where people's heads are at, what they look for when they're trying to see if they trust a charity, what might discourage it from giving. We think this is especially important this year because we know that for about 20 years now there's been a decline in the portion of people to that are engaged with charities, that give to charities, and what we want to do is turn that tide. And to turn that tide, we need to make sure that people can start with trust, that when they see a solicitation appeal, that they're not turned off by it, that it's prepared with their priorities in mind and with their trust signals in mind. And so we want to be helpful in that process.
Great. So, what are some of the most important findings in this particular report?
Yeah, so one of the most important findings is kind of the overarching result to the study. We asked people to consider 7 different accountability elements and to give us a sense of how important they are to them. The factor that came as most important was not a surprise to us. It's how the charity spends the money. And we know that that's always top of mind, so that wasn't super shocking or surprising. But I think the number 2 result was pretty important to us. And that was whether the appeals are truthful, accurate, and not misleading. And there's about 3/4 of people out there that think that is really important to them. That result came above things like impact or adequate board oversight, which are traditional things that we look at in the charitable sector. So I think this is a signal of the times. There's a lot of distrust out there. We know that there's distrust for institution, and sometimes that can translate to charities. And there's skepticism about whether information is accurate or not, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I think it's important to know that insecurity is in people's minds, and for charities to come across as truthful and to be truthful is as important as ever. The other result that I really liked has to do with charity impact. We asked folks to assess how important long-term results are and how important as compared to short-term results. And again, to do the same for high quality programs versus high volume programs. And what came out is that people are much more drawn towards long-term results and high quality programs than they are towards short-term report and high volume programs. I think that's important in a couple of ways. So one is that it takes the pressure off of charities to just kind of give numbers for the sake of numbers and to really focus on their storytelling for the quality of their programs and the real impact of their program. Another thing that came out from that is that there's a big distinction across financial, like economic household groups. So folks who are in a household who have about 70K or below in income for the year, high quality programs is really highly important to them. So half of them say that that's really important to them. But when you survey people with $200,000 or more in their households a year, that number comes down to about a third of them. And I think that has really important implication for the importance of broad support for the charitable sector. It's a result that shows how there can be different priorities or different ways of looking at what's important in a program. So we really want a broad support for the charitable sector so that folks can support the way that philanthropy want to operate in the US.
Well, let me get into the finance for a minute, charity finances. I've done a number of podcasts on the whole issue of charity finances and how people can, in some cases, be misled if they only focus on charity finances, because there are many other factors that should go into determining whether an organization is trustworthy. But finances continues to be at the top of the list. But when you, in the report, I guess I'm curious about what it means to people. Like, what are people actually looking for when it comes to a charity and its finances?
Yeah. So, like you said, I mean, there's been a lot of focus on things like financial ratios over, the last few decades. And what our findings show it is that we can take some pressure off because when we're looking at what's most important for people in terms of finances, number one was accurate reporting. So here again is not necessarily about spending very little on fundraising or any of the sort, but just to be accurate, to be truthful about how you're spending your money. And the second most important thing is how much charities spend on programs. So people do want to know the majority of spending is going towards programs, but they're not super strict on that. So when we asked them if they had a threshold, about half of them, 52%, said that they are looking for a program threshold. And when we asked them what that is, the most frequent answer was 80%. So we know that there's still a few outliers out there that want 100% of expenses to go to program, or only 5 to go to administrative fundraising or whatever it might be, but they really are outliers. So they might be making a lot of noise, but they are not the majority of the giving public. So I think this can give us a lot of comfort that people are not unreasonable about the ratios, that you can be truthful about your story, and that can take pressure off from charities.
Well, this is sort of an interesting facet about the Wise Giving Alliance, because when you look at a number like 80% going to programs, we realize that charities, it would be very difficult for most charities to operate if they had to spend 80% of all of their money on programs, because you do have to have certain administrative expenses and some money spent on fundraising if you're going to operate. And so one of the things we do is we try to interpret what that means, right? And try to adapt it to where charities actually are when we actually come out with a ratio if we do this time. So that's really interesting. And it's also very interesting that you say people are interested in accurate reporting, because I would agree that if they're not reporting, it doesn't matter what they say the ratio is if the numbers aren't telling the truth. What do people think about impact? And impact is another area that is all over the map. And I think in people's minds, it's for some people, if they go participate in a rally or a march, they feel like they've had impact. For other people, if they served a meal to someone, they feel like they've had impact. Or if they signed on to a petition or something, they believe they've had impact. And that may be some impact, but the kind of impact that I think most of us in this field are talking about is that longer term push towards a charity's mission. Doesn't mean that the activities we engage in don't have impact, but I think sometimes people get very misled into thinking that certain activities constitute impact when they're really just activities. And there's nothing wrong with that. We should report those activities. But I'm just curious, what are people thinking when they say that term impact?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of confusion, right? So, and here again, we're not talking to the charities, we're talking to the public and what they understand impact to be. And 1/3 of them would say they just don't know. So 1/3 of them don't know at all what impact means. 2/3 say they know. And the curious thing is the more that groups tell us they know, the more divided they are about what they think impact means, right? So specifically young people are across the board on the different definitions that we present to them on what impact means, and wealthier people, which I thought was very interesting because wealthier people are, where we focus our attention more as a sector and who we approach the most. And they are really divided. So folks who come from households of $200,000 or more, about 23% of them said that impact is achievement more numbers for them. Another 23% that the efficiency of spending was impact to them. 20% say that the overall change in outcomes over time based on the mission. So that's what we would, I guess, academically or in the sector say would be the correct answer. But that was number 3 for wealthy folk. And then another 17% say the high quality programs, another 16% reaching defined goals. So it's really across the board. And we can see why impact messaging from charities is across the board. So I think one of the takeaways here is that perhaps there is freedom for the charities to express their impact goals as they define them internally, as well as long as they're able to really articulate what they mean by their impact and not mislead people. I think that's a good news for charities, and to focus their efforts on communicating clearly and accurately what it is that their impact is or what they're achieving.
And now it's time for our Giving Tips segment with Bennett Weiner, one of the world's most renowned experts on charity accountability and the COO of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance.
Today, I'd like to talk to you about large gifts going to charity, and particularly some gifts that are spotlighted because of the huge amount that was provided as a result of the generosity. Earlier in the year, 2024, there was a big news story where Ruth Gottsman, who is a 93-year-old financier, donated $1 billion to the Albert Einstein College of Medicine to fund tuition for students going forward. That was a front page story, and there was a lot of attention drawn to that large gift. And now, within this past month, in July, Michael Bloomberg also announced that he was making a $1 billion gift, and this time to Johns Hopkins Medical School, also to assist in covering tuition for students attending the school. So these are tremendously large gifts given by billionaires who are certainly sending a very generous signal about their interest in philanthropy and also in the issue of medical schools being funded because of high tuition. But I think these stories also remind us that there are challenges facing the sector in terms of where it gets a significant part of its donations. And increasingly, charities are relying on wealthy donors in supporting their work as opposed to others. And one of the reasons that many of them are focusing on that is because the number of U.S. households contributing to charity has actually, unfortunately, declined. Research by the Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy has shown that while 66% of American households contributed to charity back in 2000, in 2018 it was only 49.6%, and I think more recent numbers have shown it even further declining. While wealthier donors help fill the gap, the message, I think, that these billionaire donations is also a reminder that the rest of us also need to consider contributions, because charities, for the most part, do rely on small gifts to help continue their work. And those generosities are not insignificant to them. And in most cases, the bulk of the charity's contributions revenue comes from gifts of that smaller size. So please consider smaller gifts are also needed and important. And I hope that encourages you to give more to charity if you can.
Elvia, tell me a little bit more again about this issue of high volume versus high quality programs, because it seems to me that high quality programs are sometimes very difficult to produce at scale. And I can give you an example. I was once part of a randomized control study where essentially they took some people who were in our program and studied them in comparison to people who weren't in our program over a period of 4 years. And then they decided that the people who were in the program actually did better than the people who weren't in the program. Great, right? So the idea was, now let's scale this. Let's go to some other locations with the same program to see if we can replicate those findings in different locations. And what we found is that it's so difficult to get other locations to operate the program in the same way that it was operated at that initial site. And so when you talk about scaling something, even when the initial program shows a certain impact, the scaling issue is really difficult though, right?
I think that's a really good point. I mean, the programs are very context specific. And when you're serving individuals, it might even be specific to the individual, right? The individual, the community, et cetera. So there's definitely a trade-off. So of course, we want as much volume as we can get of high quality programs, but there can be a trade-off. And to the degree that there is a trade-off, I think what we're hearing from the public is that they want the money to make a real difference. And so if you spread it out too thin, it might not. And so both things are important for the sector. And what we want to get across, I think, from these findings is to get a little bit of the pressure off for the number. Because if we let ourselves get too incentivized by numbers for the number's sake, bigger is better, we might not actually fulfill our mission the way that we want to. So that's, again, both things are important, but this is a calling to pay attention and to know that our supporters get it. They want to do it well, not just broadly.
So let's talk about cause-related promotions. The average person will know this as, you go into a store and there's an item for sale. And the item says, if you buy this product, a certain percentage of the sale price will benefit a charity or some charities. And so we've always had a standard around how that transactions should be disclosed to donors at the point of sale. So, Elvia, apparently in our donor trust report this time, we did ask people some questions around that. What did you uncover?
So, I mean, first, I would say I like the standard because it speaks to the real world and the relationships that businesses and charities can have together. We are generally supportive of those relationships if they can be done in a fruitful way and truly benefit the charity and not mislead the public, right? So that's what we're looking for here. What we ask people to do first is to tell us whether, when they see that kind of promotion, whether they're more likely to give. And what we found is, perhaps it's not surprising, but yes, people are more likely to give. About 27% say they're more likely, about around 60%, it makes no difference. And a few say that actually it turns them off, right? So, and for certain generations, so for instance, millennials said that 40% of them said that they're more likely to give if they see the product will benefit a charity in some way. So that's great news for charities and businesses that want to have a mutually beneficial partnership this way. The more troubling part is that when the terms of a cost related promotion are ambiguous, younger people are still really highly likely to want to purchase a product. And not only do they want to purchase a product, but they're highly likely to assume that there's going to be a moderate gift given to the charity or even a lot given to the charity. And that becomes a charity trust issue because we believe charities should protect first their name for their mission's sake and second their donor or contributor, right? So we want charities to really take a look. And when they enter this relationship, we've seen charity do it really well, but we also see it sometimes go wrong where the charities don't get a lot of money. They don't get a lot of blending their name. And so we don't want that to happen. We want charities to enter these relationships with the power that their mission and their name gives them and to really seek clarity in the portion of just that would go to the charity or if other limitations to the program that comes really clearly across.
So, on that theme, what differences have you observed across generations in terms of charity accountability?
A lot. Pretty much everything we ask them, they're a little bit different, right? So I think I mentioned a little bit earlier that when it comes to impact, they're very highly likely to say that they know the meaning of impact. So I don't remember the specific, but say 80% of them will tell you they know the meaning of impact. But once you ask them what the definition is, they're all over the board. So they don't have a unified vision of what that is. They also are least likely to understand overhead the way that our older generations understood it. They're more likely to be persuaded by cost marketing. They're least likely to be bothered by ambiguity in solicitation, specifically around social media. So they're more comfortable with shorter messages and not too questioning of the information that might be missing. And even when it comes to financials, they have a little bit of a different vision. They look for higher reserves. Older generations can sometimes be skeptical when organizations are holding money in reserves. And younger generation, I think, want organizations to hold more money in reserves. Maybe because of COVID, maybe who knows, but there is a lot of distinctions there. So I think what we've tried to say across the years is to highlight the importance of talking to different preferences. So that doesn't necessarily have to be segmented by generations. It could be by other aspects of preferences. But if you do want to approach younger generations, it's definitely worth paying attention to their priorities, how they look at information and how they analyze it.
Now, how about AI? I've done some shows on AI, and obviously it's here to stay. I read something today led me to believe that there's trillions of dollars that are going into AI research and AI product development and programming. And charities certainly are going to be using AI to some extent, although I don't know yet to what extent we're engaging in it. But one of the areas we can certainly anticipate charities using AI would be around fundraising. And I would imagine we had some questions around how the public views that.
Yeah. So you are an outlier in your knowledge and comfort with AI. And we as an organization were supportive of AI in some ways, right? We know that it can make a difference for organizational day-to-day work for charities, and that can take off some of the financial stresses that they might have. It can also be important for mission work, and we know that it can be important for segmenting and reaching the right folks. So we definitely know that there's a place for it if done well, but we wanted to know how the general public reacts to it, right? So there might be skepticism across the board for AI, so it's not charity specific. First question we asked about AI was, if you see a charity use AI in their solicitation materials, what's your reaction? And there is about 17% that have a very positive reaction to it. They think it's a signal of a charity being modern and innovative. So there is that bracket, but the majority of people are still pretty skeptical or have negative reactions to it. So more than half said they're either skeptical because they think the information might not be accurate, or they just think AI is a bad thing for the world. So if they see it, they don't want it. When we ask people to specifically imagine that there was language that they could identify as AI generated, or an image that they could identify as AI generated, whether that would discourage it from giving. And the majority of people say that would discourage it from giving. I am assuming this is really tight connection with our findings on the importance of accuracy in appeal. So they might not feel like that's an accurate representation. And what to me, the finding that was more surprising or cooler to me was that folks who are wealthier tend to be more favorable of AI in general as something that's innovative or positive, but they're most likely to be discouraged if they see an AI generated image or language in an appeal. So 70% of them would not give if they feel like the appeal is generated by AI. So I think who knows what to make of it, but I think what I make of it is that people understand that there is a place for AI, but they don't want to see it in an image or in an appeal because they feel that could be misleading, and they want to know that information is accurately representing the need.
Well, we're getting to the end, Elvia, but let me ask you about your general takeaway from the particular type of research as it relates to how donors feel about charities. What's your sense of the meaningfulness of this?
Yeah, so again, I think to me, the number one takeaway is that they want to feel like they can trust the information that comes from the charity. So I think they're more understanding that we give them credit for in terms of finances not being those extreme cases, or impact not being the highest number you can get, or an appeal. They just want charities to be truthful, to have a true communication, to have a real sense of what it is, how it is that they're making a difference. And I think they're more understanding that we give them credit. So that's my main takeaway. That, and then the second, that in this world, and one finding we didn't discuss here had to do with data protection. So the two things that came out to me were people want to know that they're having a truthful communication, and they want their data to be protected. So it's really, to me, telling of the times, and a really interesting finding.
So, where can people find and get a copy of the Donor Trust Report to check out themselves if they want to?
Yeah, give.org/donor trust.
Great. And you can download a copy of the report and dig into it. And if you want, you can even send Elvia some feedback. That would be cool.
I'm always happy to get it. Or ideas. Always happy to get ideas on what to look for next.
Well, I think it's a really helpful document, and it's really helpful research, again, because we want to make sure that the standards that we're using to evaluate charities really reflect the needs, to the extent possible, that donors have for understanding how to trust charities. And that is really critical for us. So I want to just, again, commend you for conducting it and for completing what must be now the 13th or 14th Donor Trust Report. As I mentioned in previous shows, this started with an idea that you had, and you came to me and said, I think we can do surveys. And my orientation was, what do you mean surveys? I mean, we did a survey way back when, and it was like so much money we couldn't even think about doing another one. But obviously you showed me that the world had changed and there were ways of doing this. And I was really happy to invest in it. And you have made us all look like geniuses for producing this. So we're so grateful for your ingenuity and your efforts.
No, thank you for saying that. No, I mean, we serve the public, right? So we should know where their minds are. So, and I think it's been fruitful for us to know, and it's great that we are thinking of them as we revisit our standards. We know that sometimes we have to rely on expertise over public expectations when they're unreasonable, but we also want to know that we're serving them and showing them what they want to see when they want to trust a charity.
Well, listen, everyone, this is Elvia Castro, and she produces the Donor Trust Report. And that's not the only thing she does. She does a lot for us. We're working on some things together now that I can't disclose, but exciting nonetheless. And you'll hear from her periodically. She'll be coming on the show periodically to talk about donor trust reports as they're released, to give you the findings and insights from those studies. Maybe some of you are listening in for the first time, And you should know that we would love for you to be a subscriber to the show. And you can do that by going to any major podcast platform. It could be Apple, Spotify, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. Or you can also go to our YouTube page, the BBB Wise Giving Alliance's YouTube page, and you can see the various podcasts that we've done there. And we would hope you subscribe to our YouTube page as well. So I just want to thank you for listening. And by the way, you can support the show. You can support the BBB Wise Giving Alliance by just going to give.org and clicking on the donate button. And there's a way for you to make a gift. And believe me, we will put that money to great use. Our work doesn't just fall out of the sky. And we need the support of individuals like you who believe in what we're doing and see that an accountable sector is one that is going to be robust and supported by people. So we hope that you'll support the Wise Giving Alliance because that's what we're standing for. So we'll see you back here again next week for a new edition of the Heart of Giving podcast, which comes out every Tuesday in the afternoon. Take care.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.